Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel, Close Reading with me, Dr. Octavia Cox, and today I'm going to be looking at Virginia Woolf, who I hope to show is not a writer to be afraid of. Remember, if you like my channel, do please subscribe. It means that you'll see the new videos that I post every week. Today, I want to introduce you to Virginia Woolf's A Sketch of the Past, written between 1939 and 1940. I know that some people find tackling Woolf and her writing a bit intimidating, especially ideas of consciousness and multiple selves. So today I want to present a way into Woolf's writing about consciousness and self through her autobiographical writing. In particular, I'm going to look at how she uses rhythm to join and think about different selves. In her diary for the 26th of January 1920, Virginia Woolf wrote about writing, "I suppose the danger is the damned egotistical self." The danger was the damned egotistical self stopping her from writing exactly as she wanted to. The ego, very generally speaking, is the sort of conscious thinking subject. So for Woolf, the damned ego, self-consciousness, being aware of yourself as a thinking being, gets in the way of and inhibits the unconscious self and the representation of the unconscious self in writing. What Woolf was consumed by in virtually all of her writing was trying to discover the best way to represent and then construct in text the life of a human being, whether fictional or real. Towards the end of her life, she died in 1941, Woolf was wondering about and pondering on the same issues regarding her own life. How best to represent and then construct writing about one's own self. This is the beginning of A Sketch of the Past. 2 days ago, Sunday the 16th of April, 1939 to be precise, Vanessa Bell was Woolf's older sister. She was an artist, a painter. She and Woolf collaborated on many of the designs of Woolf's works, which Woolf published with the Hogarth Press, and that Woolf there is the logo of the Hogarth Press, which was the publishing house that Woolf and her husband Leonard set up in 1917, and they hand printed the books from their dining room table. The Hogarth Press printed many works by modernist authors, including Catherine Mansfield and T.S. Eliot, and even the translations of the works of Sigmund Freud, also, of course, a figure very much concerned with the consciousness and the unconscious self. And here are some of Virginia's and Vanessa's collaborations for the Hogarth Press. So we've got Mrs. Dalloway from 1925, To the Lighthouse 1927, The Common Reader 1925, A Room of One's Own 1929, and The Waves from 1931. Nessa said that if I did not start writing my memoirs, I should soon be too old. I should be 85 and have forgotten. From the outset, then, we see that integral to writing a life, writing a self, writing a memoir, is the notion of remembering and forgetting. And it's an integral problem of self and thinking about self. What to do with the memories that you've forgotten, or at the moment that you cannot recollect. Furthermore, how do you organize your recollections of memories so as to present them as a coherent life? The result of Vanessa's suggestion is Woolf's autobiographical A Sketch of the Past, but as Woolf herself opens the text, there are several difficulties. In the first place, the enormous number of things I can remember. In the second, the number of different ways in which memoirs can be written. So here are two fundamental difficulties of multiplicity. In the first place, the enormous number of things I can remember. So how to choose which memories best represent the self? One has hundreds and thousands, even millions of memories. So one has to prioritize which memories are most relevant. And so one has already made a conscious choice. These memories are most relevant, those memories are least relevant. But surely all memories are relevant, even the boring ones. But no one's going to want to read an unfiltered, unedited succession of boring and not obviously relevant recollections. So the question rises again, how do you select which memories to choose in order to write a self? And how do you write then a history of that self, a memoir? But then you're going back to the damned egotistical self, because the conscious thinking subject is picking and choosing what is deemed to be relevant or not, according to what the conscious thinking self would like to be, rather than what it actually is necessarily. In the second, the number of different ways in which memoirs can be written. This again is a problem of art and artifice and choice. It's about making a choice. One has to choose which type of memoir one is going to write. So already you're putting limits on the self that is being presented. Unless, of course, one wrote multiple memoirs about the same life, presenting then different selves in each one of those accounts of that life. Putting these worries aside, Woolf says that she doesn't have time to think about which kind of memoir she's going to write. She's just going to start. Woolf continues, I begin, the first memory. She then recalls sitting on her mother's lap, and she was sitting either in a train or in an omnibus, we're told. But then Woolf recalls my other memory, which also seems to be my first memory. Again, we have an idea of multiplicity and non-linearity. These two memories almost coexist as recollected first memories. And this second additional first memory is at Talland House in St Ives in Cornwall, which you can see here. And in this additional first memory, Woolf remembers the sound of the sea. If life has a base that it stands upon, if it is a bowl that one fills and fills and fills, then my bowl without a doubt stands upon this memory. It is of lying, half asleep, half awake, in bed in the nursery at St Ives. It is of hearing the waves breaking 1, 2, 1, 2, and sending a splash of water over the beach, and then breaking 1, 2, 1, 2, behind a yellow blind. It is of hearing the blind draw its little acorn across the floor as the wind blew the blind out. It is of lying and hearing this splash and seeing this light and feeling. It is almost impossible that I should be here, of feeling the purest ecstasy I can conceive. Woolf had written to her friend on the 28th of August 1830, so almost a decade earlier. She had written to the composer Ethel Scythe. And I think it's worth noting that she wrote this to a composer, obviously someone concerned with sound and rhythm. She wrote, "The rhythmical is more natural to me than the narrative." I want to look at the previous quotation that I read through from A Sketch of the Past through this lens, that narrative, so we might say the plot, or we might say the facts of a life, the details, the times, the places, etc. That that the narrative takes a back seat to rhythm. The rhythmical is more natural to Woolf. So we might take from this that if Woolf wants a natural representation of herself, then it must be a rhythmical one rather than one bogged down in narrative details. So let's see if we can interpret Woolf's first memory through the rhythmical. If life has a base that it stands upon, if it is a bowl that one fills and fills and fills, then my bowl, without a doubt, stands upon this memory. So from the beginning, we've got if. Woolf's observation is conditional from the outset. If life, if it is. And then a base that it stands upon. If it has a foundation, it is a bowl that one fills and fills and fills. And Woolf uses here the rhetorical three. So the idea that in speech or in rhetoric, things that come in threes are the most pleasing. So, for example, I came, I saw, I conquered. And again, we've got this idea of multiplicity. It's not just a bowl that one fills, singular, but it's a bowl that one fills and fills and fills. And this is increased, this sense of multiplicity is increased by the use of plurals, fills, and the repetition of ands. So not just fills, 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 but fills and fills and fills. And there's a pleasing rhythm, as you can tell, that's created in this repetition. We've also got the repetition of the word bowl, and we go from a bowl to my bowl, without a doubt. And there's an odd kind of certainty to this, without a doubt, given the opening conditional if. So we've got this idea of one's life, of one's self standing upon a memory. And it's a very specific memory. It's this memory. So the self, her life stands on this particular memory, at least in this moment. So we went from the conditional if and this sense of multiplicity of fills and fills and fills at the opening of the sentence to the certainty and singular specificity of this memory, this one memory. The opening of the sentence then seems almost to be a kind of shadow haunting the specificity and certainty of the second part of the sentence. And note also the mirroring, balanced structure of the sentence. Stands upon, bowl, bowl, stands upon. It is of lying half asleep, half awake in bed in the nursery at St. Ives. Half asleep, half awake, that kind of traditional liminal space somewhere between consciousness and unconsciousness. It is of hearing the waves breaking. So the memory is of hearing. The idea of rhythm, of the baby Virginia lying and hearing in bed in the nursery. And because the memory is of hearing, so the reconstruction of this memory in writing must also be about hearing. And Woolf explicitly draws attention to the importance of hearing, alerting readers that they should be paying attention to the sounds. Hearing the waves breaking. This memory of hearing the waves breaking then filters into the 1939 Virginia's focus on the rhythm of those waves breaking and constructing texts that accurately reflects the rhythm of the waves breaking so that the description of the memory echoes the memory itself. It is of hearing the waves breaking 1, 2, 1, 2 and sending a splash of water over the beach and then breaking 1, 2, 1, 2 behind a yellow blind. So we've got the direct repetition breaking 1, 2, 1, 2 and Woolf's use of numbers emphasizes the metrical. It's almost like counting beats in a bar, 1, 2, 1, 2. And this metricality contrasts with the alternative rhythm of the splash, which almost sort of interrupts the other rhythm. Itself, splash is an onomatopoeic word, so obviously it's concerned with sound as well, sending a splash of water over the beach. At the end is the recollection that this sea is behind a yellow blind, almost as though one recollection leads to another recollection leads to another recollection. And furthermore, in terms of the textual form that Woolf has chosen, sound and rhythm remain important. So we've got the internal rhyme of the eind, behind blind, and the alliteration. So alliteration is when the same letter or sound is at the beginning of adjacent or closely connected words in order to highlight them. And in this case, we've got the B sound of behind and blind. So we've got that focus still on sound, but also the idea of seeing is introduced. It is a yellow blind. And then Woolf recalls also the sound of the blind's acorn, as she calls it, the handle of the blind, the knob on the string to pull the blind down. It is of hearing the blind draw its little acorn across the floor as the wind blew the blind out. Continuing the internal rhyme echo then in repeating the word blind at the beginning of this sentence. She's gone from seeing the blind to hearing the blind. Again, building up recollection, this kind of idea of layering recollection. The beginning of the sentence repeats the sentence before. It is of hearing, it is of hearing. So in the form of the sentences, we are encouraged to compare those two sentences, the sound of the waves and the sound of the blind. And here, the wind blew the blind out. Again, we have monosyllables, but the sound and rhythm of them are very different. In the sentence about hearing the waves, we have 1, 2, 1, 2, splash, 1, 2, 1, 2. But in this sentence's monosyllables, we don't have the metrical rhythm of the waves. Instead, we have round, full, elongated, and varied vowel sounds. The wind is stretching the blind out. The wind is pushing the blind to its fullest, just as the vowel sounds are extending and stretching the sentence. The wind blew the blind out. So we have, in the words of Alexander Pope from an essay on criticism, the sound echoing the sense. And I talk about Pope's famous line about good writing that the sound must seem an echo to the sense in another video. The link for that video is below if you want to watch it another time. We can see Pope's idea of good poetry in action here too in this prose. The sound, the rhythm, echoing and enhancing the sense, the meaning. Virginia's two selves come together through the rhythm. The child Virginia who experiences the rhythm, and the 1939 Virginia who recreates the rhythms and the sounds. Throughout this short passage, there is a building up of the same rhythms at the opening of the sentences. It is of lying, it is of hearing, it is of hearing. Now it is of lying and hearing this splash and seeing this light and feeling. All those ands adding to the sense of multiplicity. And feeling it is almost impossible that I should be here. Of feeling the purest ecstasy I can conceive. A bit like the waves coming and going, we've got hearing this splash again and seeing this yellow light of the blind. We've got a kind of layering, a recognition of these multiplicities and a layering of those fractured recollections. And perhaps a layering of fractured recollections is a more natural way to think about a self than imagining some neat linear progress of self from birth to adulthood, as we are often kind of encouraged to think about the development of one's self. And now we're introduced to feeling. It is of lying and hearing and seeing and feeling. And this feeling brings in the self-conscious self, the I, that I should be here. In the building up of the recollections, they are couched in the abstract it. It is of hearing, it is of lying. But then reflecting on these recollections seems to have brought back the damned egotistical self, because it's made the writer think about her being and feeling. It is almost impossible that I should be here. A moment of kind of existential crisis. And this is another kind of beautiful recognition of the multiplicity of selves, because it's unclear whether this feeling relates to the child Virginia in the nursery in St. Ives, or the 1939 Virginia recollecting those childhood first memories. The memories had been couched all the way through in the present. It is of hearing, it is of lying, and the reader is almost kind of taken back to that time as though it were the present, reliving those memories. So are these feelings then part of the original memory or a contemporary overlay? And one imagines that they must be, because a baby in a cot probably isn't having an existential crisis. And Woolf goes on, of feeling the purest ecstasy I can conceive. So this is ecstasy from its classical ancient Greek etymology and derivation from ekstasis, to stand outside oneself, from ek, out, and stasis, stand. For Woolf, these rhythmical recollections then are perhaps a way to avoid the damned egotistical self, or at least stand aside partially from the damned egotistical self, because the writing is focusing on the impression of the sounds and rhythms of this earliest memory. As Woolf writes later in A Sketch of the Past, sound and sight seem to make equal parts of these first impressions. The rhythm is a fundamental part of the child's memory, and the rhythm is a fundamental part of the adult's expression of that memory. This is the purest standing outside of herself that Woolf can conceive. I do hope you've enjoyed this very brief introduction to one way that Woolf writes about constructing a self, using rhythm to link earlier and later selves. If you have any comments, do leave them below. I'd really like to know what you think, and do please subscribe to my channel and you'll see my new videos when they appear every week.